Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Gwent, and today we're playing more of the Double Down seasonal event, which is an alternate game mode in which every card in our starting deck gets duplicated, and every time we play a unit, we will also play a random unit from our deck with the same provision cost. Today we are revisiting what was the most successful deck we have ever made, using what is possibly my favorite card, because unfortunately our golden boy Cahir has been nerfed to the ground. But on the other hand, suddenly he has an entire archetype that's built around him. So today we're going to do a comparison between the old Cahir-centric Double Down decks and the newly reworked cards that now synergize with him. So let's go give them a look. So today we're doing two things. We're revisiting our previous Nilfgaard Double Down Cahir deck, which is the most successful video that we have on this channel. So needless to say, I liked that deck a lot. However, Cahir has been nerfed and many of the cards that surround him have also been changed. So how effective is that deck today? Then we will also look at a different deck that is also structured around Cahir, but instead is built around all the newly reworked cards and new cards altogether that suddenly synergize with Cahir as well. So let's start with the original version of the Cahir-centric deck. So, of course, the idea here is that we're going to use Cahir, and with him, try to get multiple copies of him on the board, since we have two in our starting deck, and we can even create additional copies of him using Letho Kingslayer. That means that not only do we receive boosts when we boost our opponents, because we have multiple Cahirs actually benefit more from boosting our opponents than our opponents do. So that becomes our best way of generating points. Now the key thing that has changed about Cahir is, yes, he has 2 higher base power, that's not a huge deal. The important thing though is that previously he used to get boosted on your opponent's turn when they received boost, and on your turn when you boosted your opponent. Now that is no longer the case. He only gets boosted when you boost your opponent on your turn. So that makes it much harder to boost Cahir. You need to go out of your way to boost your opponent, otherwise he's not going to get boosted at all. But that's the question. Is that still good enough to pull off a Cahir-centric deck? Again, revisiting what we did previously, it was all about creating as many copies of Cahir as possible, so you have 2 in your starting deck in this event, and then 2 Lethos in your starting deck in this event, so you can try to transform both of those into Cahir as well. We'll use Ffion, our other 9 provision cost card that'll come out when we play Cahir, and that'll obviously help protect him. And then we have a bunch of other cards that are all designed around boosting our opponent so that we can get Cahir as big as possible. Most significantly is Yennefer of Vengerberg in the range row. She boosts every unit, both ours and our opponents, by 2. So if we have multiple Cahirs on the board when we do this, this is worth a ton of points and is our ideal finisher. Then similarly, but not quite as good as Yennefer, is Zoltan Scoundrel, also there for boosting many of our opponent's cards. And then we have Commander's Horn, which also boosts a bunch of either our cards, or again, if you have Cahir, ideally your opponents. That's actually worth more points. Then much smaller ways to do it with things like Nilfgaardian Knight and special cards like Swallow. So that's what we're trying to do mostly in round 3. Technically speaking, what we can do is we could play our original 2 Cahirs in round 1, and then in round 2, or potentially at the beginning of round 3, use Assire to move those Cahirs from our graveyard back into our deck, and they aren't going to end up in our hand, so ideally you have something like a tutor of some variety to then get your Cahirs out from your deck onto the board once again in round 2 or round 3. So that's, of course, the key thing that we're trying to do. Beyond that, the other option that we have is we can try to build a little bit around Glynnis, who of course at Assimilate 2 is the strongest Assimilate engine in the game, and so that's mostly a round 1 type of thing, because you're probably not going quite as all in on Cahir in round 1 as you are in round 3. So Glynnis, and then because every card that gets duplicated in your starting deck is not technically from your starting deck, that means you have lots of ways to trigger this Assimilate. Then we have a little bit more Assimilate with Imperial Diviner, so not a ton of Assimilate going on here. That's generally speaking what we're looking for. So that's really all there is to it for the original version of the deck. All, of course, very Cahir-centric. And as we've learned from past experience, at least with the old and stronger version of Cahir, you could get this up to close to, if not even above, 1,000 points. As for the deck built around the newly reworked Cahir, this time we're, of course, adding all of the new cards. So that includes things like Beauclair, which will give us the same amount of power as the highest unit from our opponent's side of the board. So now we have additional ways to benefit from boosting our opponents beyond just Cahir and Cahir alone. So in this way, you're not technically as reliant on Cahir, more ways to win around even if you don't have Cahir in your hand or on the board. So basically just copy the power from one of your opponent's strongest units, and then with the order ability, you can reset that unit, assuming that you had applied some boosts to help get it up higher. So that's one of the options with Beauclair, if that's the new legendary. Then for the new epic card, we have Guillaume, who on deploy will boost himself and an enemy unit by the average of their combined power. So generally speaking, that means you're going to want to try to target one of your opponent's biggest units, if not their biggest unit, on that deploy. And then with his order ability, once he has reached 14 power, he can then steal the statuses from one of your opponent's units. So in most circumstances, the ideal situation would probably be to steal the defender status. So if your opponent does play a defender, you don't have to target that with your deploy ability, but you should probably consider it for the order ability. If not, then, I mean, there's Veil, potentially some beneficial infusions, but defender is probably the big thing. Maybe resilience, if you can find a way to snipe that off one of your opponents as well. So that's a way to, once again, both boost our opponents and a little more indirectly benefit from those boosts as well. Then other new cards, we have another way to more easily boost our opponent with Buhurt. However, it's technically supposed to be pronounced. We boost an enemy by 3 and then boost one of our allied units by 9. So on net, it's 6 points benefiting us, but because we're also boosting our opponent in the process, and we have things like Beauclair, like Cahir, and several other cards that can benefit from boosting our opponents as well, it's technically a little bit more valuable than the other special cards like Swallow that we used to be relying on before this was introduced. Then lastly, of the new cards, at least, we have the Knight Challenger, which when we play it, will gain vitality equal to the amount of boosts on an enemy unit. So once again, you're for the most part just trying to target whatever your opponent's most highly boosted card is. Now, you're probably not going to have quite enough time to receive all that vitality before the round ends, but still turns this Knight Challenger into a bit of an engine. And then once it hits 8 power, it boosts all units by 1. That's not just your units, your opponent's units as well, which means this is actually a pretty reliable way to get a lot of boosts on your opponent's side of the board to help set up Cahir and other cards to benefit from boosting your opponent. But it's not just the new cards, because there were also a bunch that got reworked as well. So things that were not previously built around this Cahir-centric archetype suddenly do help us to benefit from boosting our opponents. So things like Palmerin, which can play an additional card from our deck, so that is a tutor of sorts in addition to the 4-point body, and then boost our opponent by the provision cost of that card, and so at least assuming that that card is worth a little bit more in point value than its provision cost, should still be a net benefit to us. That's another way to boost our opponents. Then we also have Milton, who will boost an enemy unit by 4 and then boost himself by 4. So, of course, those two things kind of cancel out. But because we have more boosting-centric synergies with boosting our opponent, that can give us additional benefits. And then with his order ability, that's one way to make it happen. You can then boost Milton by the value of whatever the most recent boost you gave your opponent was. So if it's just him that gave the most recent boost, then it's 4 points. But there are, of course, other ways, particularly with Guillaume, where you could have your most recent boost be pretty huge. So if you have just used Guillaume, that order ability on Milton could be worth a ton. Then we also have Ciri, totally reworked. She's now a disloyal card. She will play a bronze tactic from our graveyard when we play her, and then every turn she will get boosted by 1. Remember, she's still on our opponent's side of the board, so this is a way that once she does get up to Grace 8, she'll move back to our side of the board and purify herself, so she could be a good recipient of some of our ways that we can boost our opponent's units, so bear that in mind. Probably want to play her on the early side as well, so that you can have enough time to get her up to Grace 8. And then outside of that, I threw in some other things that are also synergizing around this to a certain extent. Standard Bearer, assuming that we're going to boost our opponents a lot with things like the Knight Challenger, can give us a lot of boosts as well. If our opponent has some highly boosted bronze units, then stealing them with Master of Puppets is also not a bad option either. So that's pretty much it on the newly reworked side. Oh, and also finishing with Yrden. So between that and the order ability on Beauclair, we can make sure that things don't get too out of hand, even if we do give our opponents lots of points, because we can reset most, if not all, of those units. So again, still built around Cahir, but in this case, it's a little less Cahir-centric because we have other cards that still benefit from boosting our opponents, so we aren't living and dying by Cahir as much in this case. So has Cahir really been nerfed into the ground, or do all these new cards make up for it? Only one way to find out, so let's go see it in action. Alright, so going up against Northern Realms here. And we'll go first. And let's get rid of our lower priority, low provision cost cards here. And of course, picking up Cahir is definitely nice, and Letho as well. We can use him to create additional Cahirs. So we'll start off using marching orders, and that guarantees we get Ffion, and usually I'd like to get Ffion plus 1 Cahir. That way we aren't necessarily going all in on the Cahirs right off the bat, but we do unfortunately get the second Ffion here, so we are using all of our defenders right off the bat, and normally you'd load up double defender in the melee row just in case your opponent does have a way to break through, because that is, of course, where you need to play your Cahirs, but not 100% sure we're going to go all in on Cahirs round 1, and so that's why I put it in the range row. So looking like they're going to be spawning in a bunch of copies of some kind of bronze, especially with their leader ability, but is that going to be the Reavers or something else here? Don't know just yet. Let's get Oneiromancy in our hand and get rid of one of our lower priority cards once again. And we'll use that Oneiromancy. And like I said, don't necessarily need to build around Cahir all that much in round 1. If we, for example, use Glynnis instead, because since we have all these cards that were not in our starting deck that got duplicated, those will trigger Glynnis' Assimilate, so she's a powerful engine for us. Okay, and it is not the Reavers, it's actually Centurion Royal Guards. Okay, so that's a lot of boosts. And actually, for what it's worth, with the old Cahir, we would just absolutely hard counter them, and they would have no way of beating us unless they pull out a last-second Yrden. So, I mean, that's a good sign. They also tend not to have much in the way of control. So that definitely means we can play a little more aggressively here. So we'll get out our Cahirs now, and of course, melee row behind that defender. And it's full test, okay, to boost them up, but perhaps more importantly, create additional copies of those Centurion Royal Guards. So unfortunately, we don't get boosted on their turn anymore, which is why Cahir used to be a hard counter. Should still be decently effective here, but we'll lock one of those full tests just so that they don't have quite as many of the Royal Guards getting spawned into their deck. And, well, the Alchemist is mostly just to be a little more Yrden-proof, but probably not a huge deal here. Alright, and they go Teleportation for another Reaver Scouts, and using that presumably to create additional copies of those Royal Guards. And same thing with the Blue Stripe Scout here as well. Alright, so now let's just go. Nilfgaardian Knight is probably fine. Boost him up a bit. Since we have our Cahirs, we'll get boosted as well. And, well, with all their boosted units, we get a decent boost on our Standard Bearer. And they'll pass early here. A little unfortunate just because we had a bunch of ways to continue to counter them, but we'll take the round 1 win. Alright, and we get a bunch of tutors that we draw into here, so just make sure that, because there aren't that many cards we're trying to target with those tutors, that we still have enough cards to go after with things like Oneiromancy and Royal Decree. And let's get rid of, once again, our lower priority cards. Not a huge deal. We're probably not going to play much in this round anyway, mostly just looking to use Assire here. And with her in the range row, we can bring our Cahirs from our graveyard back into our deck so that we can replay them in round 3 using those tutors. And that's another reason why I wasn't necessarily 100% all in on double Cahir in round 1, because kind of nice to still have one Cahir and at least one defender in your deck for round 3 so that your Cahirs are not quite as vulnerable, but no defenders remaining in round 3, that means. But we'll leave things at this here. We'll give them the round 2 win. We're playing for round 3 because we like a long round. All right, and marching orders is another tutor, and do we have enough to use that? We could use it to get Yrden, but we already have Yrden in hand, so that's actually not necessary. So again, just making sure that we actually have all the things that we want to target with those tutors, because, well, in that case, we actually had more than we needed. All right, so Yrden, you can tell what they're trying to do here. They're presumably trying to spawn in more of the Royal Guards to get them boosted more quickly, yes, but they're going to run out of board space pretty quickly as well. So we're going to, because we don't know the defenders, going to take a little bit of a risk here. We're going to drop the Cahirs immediately. Of course, ideally, you would have defenders as well, but again, that's why I would have liked to have not had both Cahirs, or both defenders really initially, come out in round 1. Would have been easier to hold on to one Cahir and one defender for round 3 in that case and just be a little bit safer. But we're kind of betting on them not having much in the way of control, especially if, as we expected them to do, they load up on a ton of the guards and just takes up a ton of board space. So if they do have a Yrden, they're not going to be able to play that at the very end of the round, otherwise they're just not going to have the space to do it. But let's use our Lethos to create additional Cahirs. Now the Reaver Scouts, I mean, sure, it means you can create more of your Royal Guards, true, but also that's another board space you're taking up that is not one of the Royal Guards, and that is going to be valuable real estate. Now let's use Royal Decree to get our other Letho to turn into our 4th and final Cahir. So now that we've set up all of our Cahirs, we can start getting much more aggressive with boosting our opponents. They'll go Bullholts, and Powerful Engine, yes, creates more copies of the Royal Guards as well, but still, it's not really the boosting that we're concerned about, because, I mean, again, the old Cahir would have just completely hard countered this, because we would have received all these boosts and actually gotten 4 times more boosts than our opponent, but unfortunately, in Cahir's now nerfed state, that's not happening anymore. It's up to us to boost them, but we can start to do that now. So let's go Oneiro, and with that, we actually still have more tutors than we need here, so just gonna get some Assimilate going and get another 4 provision cost card out of her deck, and this is one that can boost our opponent, so not bad in that sense. Okay, and Amphibious Assaults, probably for, yes, another Royal Guard, but at this point, they're completely out of board space. That second Royal Guard, they have to just discard altogether, and that means if they had Yrden, which would have been the biggest threat to us, they can't even fit it on the board anymore. So we're just going to boost them up and actually trigger their Grace while we're at it to power up our Cahirs further. And at this point, they just have to discard stuff, so that is the risk with a deck like the one they're using, where they just take up so much board space, they eventually run out if they don't have enough specials in their deck, or if they, you know, spawn in additional cards with Iteran and what have you. So with Leader ability, we can make sure that they have a bunch of units boosted on their side, even more than they had initially, and Standard Bearer gets a big boost as well. And once again, just easing into things here a little bit, trying to hold off on the Yen as much as possible in case they do have something to reset the Cahirs. Like, at this point, I suppose Spores would be most threatening. Don't really care about the lock at this point, so I guess we'll just bleed them. And, I mean, at this point, again, we could use this to help move the boost from a Cahir onto something in the range row, so we're a little more Yrden-proof, but since they can't play Yrden right now, that's not an issue, and they still have to discard cards. So at this point, let's go Oneiro, and this is where we start to play some of the bigger stuff, because if we go Zoltan Scoundrel, range row, that'll give us a way to boost an entire row of cards. And also proc Assimilate while we're at it. Second Zoltan, same idea here. And again, because we have 4 Cahirs, we are receiving 4 times as many boosts as our opponent is. We have passed them now. They can't do anything, and so just show you what the Yen is all about here. Same idea, range row, boosts all their cards and all of our cards, but because we have all those Cahirs, we're getting way more boosts than them. If Cahir had not been nerfed, at this point, we might have reached 1,000 points. We could finish with Yrden, but we don't even need to. Our opponent will forfeit, and we'll take the win. Alright, so going up against Nilfgaard here, and we'll go first. And, okay, we have a ton of 5 provision cost cards. In fact, almost all of our 5 provision units, so probably going to want to get rid of at least some of them here. And, of course, picking up Cahir is never a bad thing, so this will work. And we probably will look to start with some of those 5 provision cost cards. Nothing for the Nilfgaardian Knight to boost, but it's not the end of the world. Just means pure 8-point body, and we'll see if we can steal anything of note with that Master of Puppets. Infiltrator's a little bit weird. Not entirely sure what to think of that, but maybe because of the Master of Puppets, they're starting small here. So I think we hold off on that order ability and maybe just get more on the board and threaten to steal whatever else they might be trying to play, and, well, no boost yet for Standard Bearer to benefit from. And then Tibor. Okay, so that's what kind of match we're looking at here. And double Tibor, I suppose that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. So, obviously, huge bodies. It will give us 2 card drawn, so we will have card advantage, if you want to call it that, in round 1. So, does fundamentally change what we're looking to do here. Probably just means we're going to go pretty slowly, and might as well try to make that Infiltrator at least a potentially viable option to steal. Or maybe not. Because I assume that, yep, at least 1, possibly 2. Yeah, 2 locks going on both of our Master Puppets there, so no stealing after all. Let's use our stratagem to get no Nero here and just get rid of one of our low priority cards. And from here, I think we just, again, play it slow, try to get one of their cards in potential, or at least big enough that if we do find another way to steal, then it's not a terrible option for us. And Vilgefortz, okay, so obviously we did just boost one of our cards, and so it's not a terrible option for them to get rid of it. And, okay, I mean, Night Challenger could have been worse, I suppose. Moral, though, alright, so we are seeing this is probably a bit of a status deck here. Let's go with Oneiro now, and with that, we'll grab another Master of Puppets, because stealing that 11-point Infiltrator at this stage wouldn't be a terrible option for us, and Standard Bearer at least gets a small boost in this case. Imperial Enforcers for some damage, and that's also not a terrible option to steal. Although they will lock that Master Puppets as well. Wow, okay, they are going super aggressively with those statuses. So I think we just go with our defender here, and this is in large part just to give them something else to go after, because although I'm not 100% sure we're going to commit Cahir here, it at least slows down some of their attempts to control all of our cards, and they'll just pass. But because they play T-board, it still means we have several more cards we could play here if we'd like, and I think we can catch them if we're mindful of how we're playing our cards here. So we'll boost one of their units and get False Ciri out. Okay, so I suppose with her then, do we have any tactics in our... Yes, we do. Tactics in our graveyard. Good, okay. So with that, we'll, well, boost Ciri, I suppose, because we might not have that much time to get her back on our side of the board. And yeah, boosting Knight Challenger, maybe not super meaningful when we don't yet have Cahir on the board, but now if we go Palmerin, with him, we'll play, okay, Guillaume, and that can give us a great way to do a bunch of boosting, and then that means that with Milton, we get a big boost on his order, but it's not quite enough for us to catch them, and we do need to catch them on this turn. So we'll use our leader ability here, and that should be enough to get Ciri back. So that should do the trick. Doesn't matter much who we boost here, I suppose, in that case. So once Ciri returns, we have taken the lead, and even after a little bit of damage from those T-board statuses, we will still hold on for the round 1 win. Alright, and let's get rid of that Infiltrator, and obviously picking up Yrden is not bad. And I think we'll probably just drive past here, since we've one less card than our opponent, and we'd like to be on even cards going into round 3. They'll use Ciri, now not all that impactful when, obviously, we're not playing this round. Oh, is this going to be a rare Self-Vilgefortz? It is, and okay, I mean, I guess that works too. So they'll win round 2. Double Yrden, we actually don't want that because Yrden's our only 11 provision cost unit, so we're already guaranteed to get that. And we'll use Assire to get our defender back from our graveyard because we didn't play Cahir in round 1. So that's really our highest priority card that we have in our graveyard at the moment. Okay, and double Philippe, now that certainly indicates they are looking to go with more status stuff in this round as well, and that could be pretty tricky for us. So I think we start with low priority cards, ones that we don't care too much about getting statuses on them. So if we go with Assire, we'll get those defenders back. And because, really, the only reason we have her in our deck is for that deploy ability, not a huge deal if she gets shut down here. Because, sure, they can poison her if they'd like, but, I mean, it's a 6-point body, we'll live. But if they start throwing 1-point bodies on board with a bunch of spies, then that gets a little concerning. They might flood our board a little bit here. So we'll continue to throw out more of our lower priority cards, and if they do get removed, then, okay, not the end of the world. If they do stick, then obviously it's a nice little bonus, but I am a little concerned that we could run out of board space here, so it's actually not a terrible thing if they do destroy some of our units, because, yeah, if they keep on playing spies like Joachim, then that stuff will add up. We won't have much board space to spare by the end of the round, might not even be able to play all of our units, and that obviously is not good. Joachim now into Morale, so yeah, even more statuses, even more removal. So at least for now, I think we just accept that, you know, if they want to remove our low priority cards, that's fine, but if we go with Ciri, that at least allows us to play a card on their side of the board rather than our side of the board, which means they can't really put statuses on her. So, I mean, we might boost up some of their other cards. We have enough time for Ciri that I think she'll still get high enough that it won't be a huge deal, and we might be able to do some things with some highly boosted cards with our Yerdens and Beauclairs and what have you. Alright, they'll go after Milton, which I suppose makes some sense. He was potentially going to become a reasonably big card, and Imperial Practitioner with Assimilate is potentially a little bit of an engine, and Duchess's Informant, again, they're flooding our side of the board with even more low-value units. That's not good. Nilfgaardian Knight, I mean, it's something that they're stealing, yes, but I'm more concerned about running out of board space here. So if we go Oneiromancy, I think with that, what we'll do is now, because we boosted up some stuff next to those Philippes, we can destroy at least one of them, and that should at least slow down their attempts to apply all these statuses to us, which means we can perhaps begin to play some of our higher priority cards at this point. So I think now we'll go Oneiromancy and get our defenders out, because although we don't have anything super important to protect at the moment, it at least perhaps is a source of removal bait for them. I assume they'll try to go after these Ffions, even though we don't really have that much of a need for them right now. So yeah, they'll lock at least one of them with Ox, it looks like. And then another Ox. We'll lock the second one, and that sets up for an easier Philippe removal later on. We do get Ciri back. And now I think we'll play Cahir. We've actually, for what it's worth, we've already pretty much done all of the opponent boosting that we plan to do here. So Cahir is actually not going to be all that important for us, which is, again, why we don't care that much about our defenders, but it does at least have them focusing on units that we don't really care all that much about and giving us a little more board space, because if they keep on playing more spies on our side of the board, then that is really the biggest threat to us. We want to make sure we still have room for Ivar and obviously Yrden at the end of the match. We do need to play Ivar on this turn, otherwise his adrenaline is going to kick in and he's going to get weaker. So we'll basically just steal the power from whatever their highest power units are at the moment. And that's another reason why we obviously wanted to boost up some of their units. Right now they're going after the other defender. And they did play Anna Henrietta to steal our leader ability. And here's another to steal our leader ability again. So, okay, we'll probably be seeing more of that. And we should have just enough board space at the moment for Beauclair. And then, once they remove that defender, the second Beauclair and both Yerdens. But if they play any more disloyal cards, then we will truly not have enough board space for everything. So that is a little bit concerning. There's their other leader ability. So this is close at the moment, but of course we do have some really big finishers here. So we'll go with another Beauclair. And just boost up our smallest unit based on the value of their highest unit. And so again, just enough space for both Yerdens. So we don't want them to play any disloyal card. That is the biggest concern here, and of course that is exactly what they're doing. So, okay, Fire Scorpion's not a huge deal though. So they only have a small lead here, and of course between the two Beauclair order abilities and a single Yrden, that is almost as good as double Yrden, so just reset their biggest cards in one row with the Beauclairs and use this Yrden to reset the other row. Shouldn't be a big deal that we don't have enough space for that last Yrden, because either way we'll still take the win. So there's a look at a Nilfgaard Cahir deck, both old and new. If you liked the video, then make sure to hit the like and subscribe button and leave a comment down below to let me know which other cards, archetypes, and factions you'd like us to experiment with next. And let me know if you prefer the old Cahir setup or the new Cahir setup. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.